Jay Roach, director and producer of HBO's All the Way. You've now worked with Bryan Cranston on two major projects in a row. How did you first meet him?
We met at some awards thing years ago, and I had the best talk with him ever. But the recent thing was we just thought he'd be great for Trumbo. So I was working on that film, and he had popped up, and you know, it's always hard with these indie films. People have ideas about who's gonna be able to get a film financed and who's not, and he wasn't super high on the list. I couldn't believe that because he was so beloved after Breaking Bad. But the more we talked about it with the financiers, we said, no, this guy, this is it. This is going to be amazing. And he's got the range I need. He'll find a way to be this larger than life character, but be real. And I, of course, like everybody who fell in love with that show, his intensity is compelling, and you want to come back and see him again. So yeah, so I met him that way. Then strangely, they offered me the chance to direct All the Way while we were prepping Trumbo, and I said yes instantly because I had seen the play. Then I went back and saw it again, but I said yes, and then I thought, oh man, I'm just signed on to two films with someone, and what if we don't get along? You know, the relationship of trust that actors develop with directors is a huge part of collaborative thing. So if you don't have that, boy, that could have been a disaster for the second one. But we got it going quite well on Trumbo and it carried in.
Well, I was wondering about the timing on that. So you had not shot Trumbo when you committed to when you saw All the Way the play and committed to do the movie.
That's right. We were in prep a few weeks from doing it, and I went back and saw the play. But I've been obsessed with that period. I grew up in that period, you know, so you always have some part of you that wants to go back and figure out what was going on when you were sort of too young to understand it entirely, but you knew something amazing was happening. And that was the mid to late 60s when I was, you know, from age 8 or 9 until, you know, 11 or 12. And so once I saw what he was doing, what Schenken, the great Robert Schenken, who wrote it, who had written the Kentucky Cycle, which I'd been aware of. The trick was, once I saw the play, was, okay, how are we going to do something beyond what you've already accomplished with this? Because they accomplished so much in that 3-hour play. And I just didn't know for sure what it would be, but I had a hunch we'd figure it out. And the thing that really convinced me we were onto something good was when we went to the LBJ library and I got to hear all the phone calls that Johnson recorded, because he recorded everything. He secretly recorded without telling people. He had these dictaphones in every desk near his bed in both the White House and the Austin Western White House, as they called it. So you could actually hear at the library dozens and hundreds really of these calls. And in some of them, you got a sense of the anxiety, the pressure, the intimate, even self-pity and insecurity and just humanity of the guy. And I thought, well, you get that on stage because Robert's play is so well written and the performance is so amazing. But he's playing to 1,400 seats, you know, and I thought if you were up close and designed a movie that felt from a subjective point of view, almost from a mind's eye point of view, you might get some of that psychology and that soul at stake that was going on that you could hear in those phone calls.
You know, a couple of things about this project, or anybody that takes on, say, a play and then doing a historical play, it just seems to me like you've got two big challenges right away. One is, I know, you know, I don't ever get to New York, so when somebody adapts a play or a musical, I'm always wanting just, okay, what's the big deal here? Because I hear about it all year. So you've got that group to satisfy of you know, making, you know, showing them what this thing is all about. But then historically, you've got to get that right.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about the challenges of both of those areas?
Yeah, I mean, the play, living up to the expectations of that, were daunting. It won a Tony. Cranston won a Tony for the performance. Play won a Tony. But that I guess because people do adapt great work sometimes, and I for some reason that didn't scare me as much as I said. Especially once I heard these calls and I knew there was a cinematic way to bring you intimately into Johnson's sort of anxiety dream, if you will. And even also, Johnson was famous for coming right up close to you and being right in your face and leaning over you and flattering you and charming you, but then kind of bullying you and twisting your arm. And I felt like cinematically, if the camera and the way it was cut and the way Bryan performed it, and really even more importantly, the way we cast the people he would be doing that to, Bradley Whitford as Hubert Humphrey, or Frank Langella as Senator Russell, that you would just feel an intensity, that we could live up to the expectations of the play. Historically, that's always daunting. I've done it now, and this is my fourth history play, history film. That is challenging, and I learned on recounts when I started doing these that if you can just do every possible thing you can to get it right, get the story right, you will never fully capture the complexity, the whole time span of it, the whole timeline of it, all the people. You can't go back on a time machine and record every aspect, and you wouldn't want to, because some of it's amazing and interesting, but some of it's really dull, and some of it's repetitive, and some of it's, so you do have to just trust that if you do the research, you interview everyone you can possibly find who actually experienced it. You certainly do all the normal research of deep reading and studying films and studying interviews and listening. Like I say, the most important thing to me were these recorded calls, which, by the way, are completely available online now. You can just type in Google Johnson phone calls, and you get a site that has all of the audio and another site that has them indexed by keywords and everything. And you can listen to his entire presidency, basically. He actually talked Nixon into recording his calls too, by the way. So if he hadn't, Nixon would have never resigned. But that level of research just makes you confident as best you can be that you're going to get it right. And then you still, there's still things I wish I could have worked in. There's so many layers, but if you devote yourself to it, you can, I think, get as close as one could get to what matters, to what each character cared about, to what they're up against, what they feared. And if you can stay true to that, the historical accuracy, again, I hope the film just takes people to the places where you can get as much of those details as you want. So it's really just about inspiring people to talk about it and to look into it, but it can never entirely capture the history of it.
I'm glad you said that word bully. That occurred to me as I was watching it, but such a charming bully. I thought, as a person would leave his presence, after a meeting or after he convinced them of something, I wondered, 5 minutes later, do they go, what did I just agree to?
That's a really good way of, I would wonder that too, because he was so persuasive. There's this great call he had in the real tapes convincing Sergeant Shriver to both to stay on the Peace Corps operation he was on, but also to come and run his war on poverty, his whole poverty program. And Shriver tries 3 times to get out of it in the middle. And the first time he's just saying, no, I need you to do it. I told everybody you're going to do it. So you got to do it for America. And he says, well, let me think about it, Mr. President. And the second time he goes, now we're going to do what you said you were going to do, where he hadn't said he was going to do it. And by the third time he said, let's just leave it where you told us it was going to be, and his way of just muscling you into it. And I was thinking about this before this call today, what other things that I haven't talked about that I love about this man, learning about this president, is that he was so experienced at legislation. He had been in the House of Representatives for 12 years, roughly, in the Senate for roughly 12 years, 2 or 3 years as vice president, that he actually, we hear these days from people who run for office, I guess, obviously just because politicians are so unpopular lately, but you hear, this is the Washington establishment and I'm from outside. I got no experience, therefore I'm better for this job. And Johnson was the opposite of that. He was so prepared, so sure of what he was up to and why it would improve the quality of lives of Americans, actually make their lives better, that he was relentless, uninhibited, not politically correct, but doing the right thing. And he was, once a guy like him with that much charisma and that much experience gets on you, you know, it's pretty tough to stand up to that. You know, he was doing the right thing, and he would say, do you want to be on the right side of history, or do you want to go down as just a person who can talk, you know? And I think you're right. When you walked out of the room, you must have been, what did I just agree to? How am I going to justify this to my constituents? And so there's a number of scenes where I like that scene with Fulbright where he corners them in an elevator, you know, just literally backs him against a wall and just gets on top of him and convinces him to leave town during a key vote on the Civil Rights Act. It's pretty, I love that part of that's a skill. I bet you that's a pretty rare skill on Capitol Hill these days.
Yeah, so many fun elements to this, but serious stuff too, with all the civil rights and, you know, all the things. I mean, it starts out with the assassination of President Kennedy. I'm wondering though, you know, the whole thing ends with the re-election. So there's, you know, obviously 4 years after that, plus the rest of his life is. I've heard rumors that maybe you and Robert and Bryan and others would, you know, gather together again. Is that a possibility?
It's definitely a possibility. Schenken's written a great sequel. I saw it in Seattle. I actually saw it back to back, the original play and the sequel with the actor that had originated the play, and not Bryan, and it was like a 6 hour, for a political junkie, it's like a 6 hours of paradise, because you live in it. And the second play covers the entire rest of his presidency from the election in '64 through 68. And of course he resigns, in March '68 after realizing that he's become somewhat more unpopular. The war is going horribly, the Vietnam War, and he's still afraid that Bobby Kennedy is going to jump in. So he's it's that play covers that. I don't know what will happen in terms of it turning into a film. It's kind of up to a lot of other people as well. I'd certainly be interested in it if Bryan and HBO and Steven Spielberg, who was our great executive producer on this, jumped back in. It wouldn't be hard to convince me to do it.
Do you think it would need to go through the process that the other one did, where it would be a play, like a Broadway play first and then a film?
I think it might, because there's just that opportunity. If you're gonna, with such an incredible experience on Broadway, it's almost, you almost owe it to that audience, to let them see it first, because they were so devoted to it when it came out on Broadway. But I'm not sure. There's lots of ways you could go at it. And again, there's so many great books that delve into it in such detail. If people have read the Robert Caro books, the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, she consulted on our project, and the Taylor Branch book about the Civil Rights Movement, Pillar of Fire, the Garrett book called Bearing the Cross. I mean, there's so much great material. So until the sequel comes around, if you've got a yearning to know more about this time period, Dr. King, LBJ, during this fight to establish Civil Rights Act of '64, and then the subsequent, Selma actually covers a lot of that next year, the very next year of '65, when the Voting Rights Act was passed. So in a way, Selma is a companion piece, if you want it to be. But there's an awful lot out there to soak up if you're interested in this topic.
The reason we wanted to have you on this week was Emmy ballots just came out a couple of days ago. You're the king of the Emmys lately. You've never lost an Emmy award. You've won two for recount, and then 2 for game change. I love the fact too, when I went back to look at the years, it was 2008 a presidential year, 2012 a presidential year. Now we're in 2016 a presidential year. You've got this whole thing figured out, right? Well,
or we're like the locusts. We just come out every the campaign season is very compelling to me. I'm sure people who follow the Olympics feel that way about but there's something so important to me about the questions that come up about how should our civilization run, when these clashes of a political philosophy of what makes a political system legitimate and effective or not effective, and those matter to me. And I guess I end up we do somewhat intentionally try to have the films come out as part of the conversation. If it were come out after the election, it might be a little less compelling. But now that we're all trying to figure out what's going on, these films can be, again, just part of the round table, if you will, with our fellow citizens, because we really do care about these issues. And the awards are fun, and I'm certainly honored, but there's a lot of great stuff. I really love some of the other films and limited series out this year. So it's all good. I don't have any expectation or requirement, and I'm just excited that television is doing so much good work. And I mean, I'm very closely affiliated with HBO. I'm glad to be, and they've kind of pioneered some of this kind of programming, and I feel incredibly lucky to be associated with everything they do, and they have another great film too, Confirmation. I thought that was a very impressive film as well. So who knows, I'm just feeling like, wow, it's so rare to find financing and interest frankly from studios or other television networks to make films that I think are very compelling, even though they're about political issues. Politics is one of the buzzwords that has kind of, is something that people avoid in the film business sometimes. And I think it's a mistake, because I think even you go back to like Shakespeare, even the great personal stories were always set against some giant political struggle, that the troops were, near the castle walls, and yet here's Hamlet trying to figure out who he is as a human being and what's going on with his mother and his uncle. So that for me, these are more personal stories and personal anxieties, personal interests set against these much larger issues. It just seems like more layered storytelling. So I feel lucky that HBO sees it that way too.
Yeah, definitely rich material when you go into the world of politics, and especially if you have historical world of politics. Like you mentioned, I mean, television is so good right now, especially the last few years, that if Emmy voters do single you out, or Bryan, or Robert, or whoever, anybody in the cast, or your incredible makeup team. Boy, when I first saw the photos months ago, I was just blown away. But if the voters single you out, that it's among great company.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I do really respect what other people are accomplishing out there. There's a lot going on. Yeah, our hair and makeup people. I love the way Bryan turns into Johnson. I love the way Bradley Whitford turns into Humphrey. He doesn't get that kind of opportunity to do much transformational, character channeling of a guy like him, and the team with his hair and his incredible makeup. But yeah, we were there. Those are great opportunities to use every bit of cinematic grammar to capture something as I think as important and something that matters, but in an entertaining way too. I typically try to find the ironies and the absurdities too. So I hope people look at it as an enjoyable couple hours, as well as a meaningful couple.
Oh, you absolutely did. I got to say, I enjoyed the whole thing, but my favorite just like single moment that was like, wow, was when they're in I guess the Jeep or the vehicle together, and suddenly they're going into the water, and it's I didn't know that was going to happen, and it was just such a fun, surprising moment.
I know I have talked about it a few times, so the cat's out of the bag on that one. But it was, for people, it was really surprising. But he actually would prank people who visited him on the ranch that way. We didn't make that up. He had an amphibious car, and he would drive in it, drinking his whiskey and going too fast on these bumpy dirt roads, and suddenly pretend he'd lost control and the brakes went out, and suddenly you're going off into a bank into the water, and then the car, it seemed like it could sink, and people would sometimes try, like Humphrey does in ours, try to get out for a second, and he then reveals that it's a boat, a car that turns into a boat. The propellers come out the back, and he starts cruising around in the lake. And he would use that not just for the fun of pranking them, but to get them off balance a little bit and break the ice. And then, as he does in our film, he would then start doing the Texas twist, you know, and twist the arm a little bit and get something good done for America. What a strange.
You gotta love a president that would do that. And I didn't even think about it until that moment that you just said that just now. But that could also be a, you know, when he's with somebody and doing any kind of a prank like that, it could be like, you have no idea what I'm capable of.
Yeah,
I could do anything at any moment.
Yeah, he definitely exploited his unpredictability, and he was charismatic enough that you couldn't get mad at him. You know, you'd resent it possibly, but you wouldn't feel like it was for any cruelty. It was more because you could tell he was trying to do the right thing most all the time. I mean, he got pretty, you know, he could get very petty and self-pitying, and we didn't pull back from that, you know. But many of the hours of his existence in the White House were about just trying to right the injustice of Jim Crow laws in the South, willing to risk his entire support system from his Southern Caucus colleagues, which he knew he would need when he ran for re-election, risk all of that just to do the right thing, to get the Civil Rights Bill passed and end Jim Crow. And he needed all those guys he needed to sometimes bully them into becoming allies of his. Pretty phenomenal.
Well, listen, thanks for another great movie. We've been wanting to chat with you forever, so I appreciate your giving us the time today, and good luck at the Emmys later this summer.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much. This has been fun, and yeah, it'll be enjoyable to see all the other projects swirling around the next few weeks.